the Grand Canyon, where the afternoon sun paints the cliffs in glowing red, where millions of visitors come each year to marvel at nature's endless beauty. Yet, behind that majesty lies a darker side, filled with secrets and disappearances that few dare to speak of. In August of 2023, on a sweltering morning, a man suddenly appeared at a ranger station near the rim of the canyon. He was gaunt, his beard unkempt, his hair wild, and on his back he wore nothing but a ragged wolfskin. People stared in disbelief, unable to trust their eyes, for the man was Kyle Marsh, someone who had been presumed dead 5 years earlier. Lost along with his closest friend during a fateful expedition into the Grand Canyon. Kyle's return sent shockwaves through everyone who had followed the case, but the true terror was not simply that he was alive. It was the story he carried back with him, a grim and haunting secret about those final days, about the companion who never returned, and about something still lurking in the depths of the canyon's shadowed walls. 5 years before Kyle Marsh staggered back into the world of the living, his story began like so many others with a sense of adventure and wonder. It was the spring of 2018 when Kyle, then 27, and his closest friend, 29-year-old Brandon Lowry, packed their bags in Las Vegas for what was meant to be a week-long escape into the wild beauty of the Grand Canyon. Both were passionate amateur photographers, drawn to landscapes where light and stone created fleeting moments of perfection. For them, the canyon was not just a tourist attraction, it was a cathedral of nature, waiting to be captured through the lens. On the morning of the 12th of April, they set out before dawn. The drive from Las Vegas to the park was quiet, broken only by bursts of conversation and the hum of the car radio. Brandon had researched lesser-known trails, routes that promised untouched scenery far from the crowded overlooks. Kyle, always the more cautious one, hesitated but ultimately agreed. They weren't after the typical postcard shots. They wanted the canyon as it had been for centuries, raw and unforgiving. By midday, the two friends entered the park, their cameras hanging from their necks, backpacks heavy with gear, food, and water. Instead of choosing the safer, popular routes, they turned toward Hants Creek Trail, one of the park's most demanding paths. It was a 19-kilometer stretch, notorious among experienced hikers for its remoteness, its steep drops, and its unrelenting heat. Rangers often warned that the trail humbled even the strongest travelers. But to Kyle and Brandon, that was exactly the point. They wanted to test themselves against the canyon's silence. The first hours were filled with exhilaration. They took photographs of sheer red walls glowing in the afternoon sun, of the Colorado River flashing silver far below. Kyle wrote short notes in his journal, describing the shifting shadows, the way the air grew cooler as they descended, deeper into the gorge. Brandon, by contrast, was restless, always searching for the perfect vantage point, straying a little off trail to capture another angle. As night began to fall, they made camp on a narrow plateau overlooking the abyss. The stars emerged one by one, until the entire sky seemed to burn with 1,000 fires. In the stillness, the friends talked about the future projects they wanted to start, places they dreamed of traveling. Neither of them could have imagined that this trip, meant to be a celebration of life and freedom, would soon spiral into a nightmare. Because somewhere beyond the flickering light of their campfire, the canyon was waiting. Waiting with its endless labyrinth of cliffs and caverns, waiting with dangers that maps could not capture. And as dawn approached on their second day, Kyle and Brandon would take a step that led them off the familiar trail and into the unknown, a step from which only one of them would ever return. When Kyle and Brandon failed to return from their journey, the first whispers of concern came from family and close friends. Both men had promised to check in, at least by phone, after their hike. Days passed without a single message. At first, people made excuses. Perhaps they had lost cell service, or maybe they had chosen to extend their trip. But by the 5th day, those explanations no longer held. Calls went unanswered. Their hotel in Las Vegas confirmed that neither had checked back in, and their rental car sat abandoned at the trailhead where they had last been seen. On the 18th of April, the Grand Canyon Rangers launched an official search and rescue operation. It began with helicopters sweeping over the rugged ridges, their spotlights cutting across the endless walls of rock. From above, the canyon looked deceptively still, an ancient landscape carved by the river, indifferent to human fear. Rangers peered down into ravines, scanned for movement, and looked for the faintest signs. A bright piece of fabric, a reflective glint of metal, anything. But the canyon gave nothing back. Teams of ground searchers followed the Hants Creek Trail, retracing the path Kyle and Brandon were believed to have taken. They found the remnants of a small campsite, a fire pit marked by blackened stones, a discarded food wrapper, the imprint of 2 sleeping bags pressed into the dirt. The discovery confirmed that the men had made it, at least through the first night. Yet, beyond that point, the trail seemed to vanish. The deeper the rescuers went, the more treacherous the terrain became. Hants Creek was notorious for its steep, narrow passages, where walls of stone rose high on both sides, turning the hiker's world into a labyrinth. In those shadowed places, GPS signals grew weak, and even experienced search dogs struggled. For days, the teams pushed forward, but the canyon swallowed their efforts. Family members flew in, clinging to hope. Brandon's sister gave a tearful interview, pleading for her brother to be found. Kyle's father paced near the command tent, his face a mask of exhaustion. Volunteers from across the state joined in, some combing the trails, others scanning the riverbanks. The Colorado River itself was searched, as bodies sometimes washed up downstream. But no trace appeared, not a backpack, not a shoe, not even a fragment of camera equipment. After 2 weeks, the operation scaled back. Officially, the men were declared missing, presumed dead. The families were devastated, left only with questions. How could 2 healthy young men vanish without a trace in a park where every trail was mapped, where thousands of people hiked each year? Rangers quietly admitted that such disappearances, though rare, were not unheard of. The canyon had claimed lives before, and it would do so again. But still, something about this case felt different. In the months that followed, theories circulated. Some believed they had simply underestimated the heat and collapsed from exhaustion, their bodies hidden in some inaccessible crevice. Others whispered of accidents near the river, where powerful currents could sweep a person away in seconds, yet the lack of evidence nagged at everyone involved. If they had fallen, why hadn't their gear been found? If they had drowned, why hadn't anything surfaced? The mystery grew darker with time. Online forums speculated wildly about hidden caves, secret passageways, even encounters with people living off-grid deep inside the park. Each theory seemed more far-fetched than the last, yet the simple truth was this: 2 men had walked into the Grand Canyon, and neither had walked out. By the first anniversary of their disappearance, the case had faded from headlines. The families held quiet memorials, placing flowers at the trailhead where the men had last been seen. Brandon's mother whispered that she still dreamed of her son, that he was calling for help from somewhere she could not reach. Kyle's name, too, became just another entry in the long list of those who had gone missing in the vast, merciless landscape. And then 5 years later, he returned. His reappearance would shatter everything that had been assumed, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. The failed search had left only silence and grief, but Kyle carried back something far worse, a truth that would chill everyone who heard it. For 5 years, the world believed that Kyle Marsh was gone forever, another name lost to the Grand Canyon's long, unforgiving history. His family had mourned, his friends had moved on with the ache of uncertainty, and the story of his disappearance had been filed away as unsolved, another tragic cautionary tale. And then, in the late summer of 2023, everything changed. It was an ordinary morning at a ranger station near the eastern rim when a figure appeared on the horizon. At first, the staff thought it was just another weary hiker making his way in from the backcountry. But as he drew closer, unease spread among them. The man's clothes were little more than tatters, his face obscured by a wild, matted beard, his skin stretched thin over sharp bones. Draped across his shoulders was what looked like the ragged pelt of a wolf, and his eyes sunken, haunted, seemed unable to focus on the world around him. When he stumbled through the station doors, silence fell. Someone whispered his name. Another gasped. Slowly, recognition spread, and with it, a shock so deep that no one dared to speak it aloud. The man was Kyle Marsh, the hiker who had vanished with Brandon Lowry 5 years earlier. The Rangers moved quickly, offering water, food, and medical care. Kyle drank in silence, his hands trembling so violently that the cup rattled against his teeth. He barely responded when spoken to, as though language itself had grown foreign in his mouth. Hours later, after being transported to a nearby hospital, the truth was confirmed by fingerprints and dental records. This was, indeed, Kyle. Against all reason, he had survived. News spread like wildfire. Headlines across the country blazed with his name. Lost Grand Canyon hiker found alive after 5 years. Cameras gathered outside the hospital, reporters clamoring for answers. How had he lived all this time? Where had he been? And, most haunting of all, what had happened to Brandon? At first, Kyle said nothing. Doctors described him as malnourished, dehydrated, his body covered in scars both old and new. He avoided eye contact, often staring off at walls as though listening to voices no one else could hear. When asked simple questions, he would shake his head or mutter incoherently. His silence only deepened the mystery. But as days turned into weeks, fragments of his story began to emerge. Whispers, really spoken in hoarse tones, sometimes in the dead of night, when he thought no one was listening. He spoke of caves hidden far below the canyon floor, of passages that twisted deeper than any map acknowledged. He muttered about firelight flickering in the dark, about the sound of water dripping in endless chambers. His words were disjointed, almost feverish, but one thing was clear: he had not been alone. When pressed about Brandon, his expression would change. His eyes would grow wet. His jaw would tighten, and he would whisper just a single sentence. He's still down there. Nothing more. No explanation, no detail, just those chilling words. The families, once resigned to grief, were thrust back into torment. Brandon's parents demanded answers, pleading with authorities to reopen the case. Investigators tried to question Kyle formally, but every attempt ended the same way, with him retreating into silence or trembling so violently that the sessions had to be stopped. Something had happened in those 5 years, something too dark, too unbearable for him to speak plainly. And though his body had returned, whole enough to be recognized, his spirit seemed trapped somewhere still, lost in whatever shadows had swallowed him in the canyon. The world celebrated his survival, but those who looked into Kyle's eyes knew the truth. This was not the return of a man rescued from nature's grasp. This was the return of someone who had walked through a place few could imagine, and who had come back carrying secrets that might have been better left buried. For weeks after his return, Kyle's silence became its own kind of prison. Doctors urged him to speak, investigators pressed for answers, but he resisted. It was as though the words themselves carried a weight too heavy to release. And yet, one evening in the hospital, as rain lashed against the windows, Kyle finally began to unravel the truth. A nurse on duty later recalled how he sat up suddenly in bed, his eyes wide, his voice trembling. "We didn't mean to go that far," he whispered. We just wanted to see what was hidden." At first, his words came in fragments, half sentences, choked by fear. But slowly, piece by piece, the terrible story emerged. On their second day in the canyon, Kyle and Brandon had strayed from the marked trail, chasing after a narrow ravine that seemed untouched by human feet. They thought it was just another detour, another chance at photographs no one else had taken. But the ravine led them deeper, winding into a labyrinth of cliffs and shadows. Soon they realized they were lost. Food and water dwindled quickly. Days bled together. The heat scorched them by day, and the cold bit through their clothes at night. They tried to climb back, but the walls rose too steep, the paths too confusing. And then they found it a hidden cave, concealed by brush and stone. Desperation drove them inside. According to Kyle, the cave seemed endless. Passages twisted downward, leading to chambers where water pooled and echoes carried. At first, it felt like salvation. They could drink, rest, escape the punishing Sunday. But as the days passed, the cave became a prison. They couldn't find their way back to the surface. Their torches burned low. And in the dark, their fear grew sharp, gnawing at both body and mind. Then came the breaking point. One night, Brandon and Kyle argued about whether to keep exploring deeper in search of another exit, or to stay put and hope for rescue. The fight escalated into violence. "He was so hungry," Kyle muttered to investigators. "So was I, but he looked at me like I was the enemy, like it was me or him." Kyle claimed that in the chaos, Brandon attacked first. There was a struggle, screams echoing off the stone walls. In the dim glow of their last flashlight, Kyle struck back. He didn't describe the details, only that Brandon fell and did not rise again. At this point in his confession, Kyle broke down, his voice collapsing into sobs. "I tried to save him. I swear I did. But I was so hungry, so weak. I left him there. I left him in the dark." Authorities who heard the confession later debated what it truly meant. Did Kyle simply abandon his friend to starvation and death? Or was there something worse, something he dared not put into words? Some suspected cannibalism, though Kyle never admitted it outright. What he did say was chilling enough. I lived because he didn't. Kyle's confession spread through the media like wildfire. Public opinion fractured. Some saw him as a tragic survivor, a man forced into an impossible choice. Others called him a murderer, a coward, who sacrificed his friend to save himself. But through all the speculation, one fact remained. Brandon's body had never been found. No search team could locate the cave Kyle described. It was as if the canyon had swallowed both the truth and the evidence, leaving only Kyle's haunted words to cling to. And so, his confession hung in the air, heavy and unresolved, a terrible secret dragged from the shadows of the Grand Canyon, where one man lived, one man died, and the line between survival and horror blurred beyond recognition. Kyle's confession did little to settle the mystery. If anything, it deepened it. Authorities and experts struggled to separate fact from fevered memory. Was his story the literal truth, or the fractured recollections of a man broken by years of isolation? Some investigators leaned toward the simplest explanation: survival, desperation. They argued that hunger and thirst can drive even the closest friends into conflict. Perhaps Kyle had indeed fought with Brandon, and in the chaos, tragedy struck. If true, Kyle's guilt and silence were understandable, even if the exact details remained hidden. Others, however, found problems with his account. If he had lived in the cave for so long, why had no one found it in the countless searches over 5 years? The canyon was vast, yes, but search teams were thorough. The absence of Brandon's body, or any belongings, raised unsettling doubts. Was Kyle hiding something? Could he have wandered out of the park far earlier and chosen to vanish, only to resurface with a tale of shadows to mask his actions? Psychologists weighed in as well. Extended isolation, malnutrition, and trauma, they explained, can fracture the human mind. Kyle's visions of firelight and echoes in the cave might have been hallucinations. His confession might blend scraps of truth with distorted memory, leaving no clear line between what happened and what he believed. Yet among locals and online communities, darker theories circulated. Some insisted that Kyle and Brandon had stumbled upon something they were never meant to see. Hidden passages, perhaps, or evidence of people living secretly in the canyon's depths. Kyle's haunted eyes and cryptic words only fueled speculation. In the end, no definitive answer emerged. The Grand Canyon remained silent, withholding whatever truth it held. And as much as investigators searched for clarity, the case settled into that most unsettling of categories: unsolved, unexplained, forever tangled in speculation. In the end, the Grand Canyon kept its silence, No cave was ever located, no trace of Brandon was recovered, and no further answers emerged from Kyle's broken words. The official record listed Brandon Lowry as missing, presumed dead, and Kyle Marsh as the lone survivor of a tragedy that still defied reason. But in truth, what survived was not a man returning from the wilderness, but a shadow carrying a burden too heavy for any heart to bear. Those who met Kyle after his return described him as hollow, as if part of him had never come back from the depths. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words circled back to the same haunting refrain. He's still down there. Whether he meant Brandon's body or something darker that lingered in the canyon's hidden chambers, no one could say. For the families, the pain never lifted. Brandon's parents clung to fading hope that one day their son's remains might be found, that closure might finally arrive. For Kyle's family, relief was tangled with sorrow. They had their son back, but he was no longer the man who had left with a backpack and a camera. What returned was someone marked by secrets, someone who seemed more ghost than flesh. And for the countless hikers who stood at the rim of the Grand Canyon, gazing into its endless expanse, the story became a chilling reminder. Nature's beauty can mask unimaginable danger, and survival can demand choices too terrible to imagine. Perhaps that is why this story lingers, long after the headlines have faded, not because of what was proven, but because of what was never explained. The canyon does not yield its mysteries easily. It keeps them, swallows them, and leaves behind only whispers carried on the wind, echoing against stone, haunting the dreams of those who dare to descend. To those who listen to this tale, let it be more than just a mystery. Let it be a warning. When we venture into the wild, we are stepping into a place that does not belong to us, a place where even the strongest can falter, where even friendship can be tested to the breaking point. And sometimes, the darkest dangers are not the cliffs or the heat or the shadows in the stone. Sometimes, the darkest danger lives inside us, waiting for the moment when survival asks its most terrible question: what would you do to live? If this story left you thinking, don't forget to support Last Seen by subscribing and sharing. Every week, we bring you haunting disappearances and mysteries that remain unsolved. Who knows, maybe the next clue is waiting for someone like you to notice. Stay with us, and never miss what was last seen.